If you're interested in decoding the complexities of China's national security outlook and its military modernization, check out Takshashila's latest expert capsule course offering China's defense in the new era. Visit school.takshashila.org.in and enroll in the course today.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Suman, your host today, and I'm joined by my colleague, Shambhavi, who is a research fellow at the Takshashila Institution and also the chairperson of Takshashila's Health and Life Sciences Policy Program. Hi, Shambhavi. How was lunch?
Hey, Suman. Hello, everybody. Lunch was good, completely sourced from naturally occurring organisms.
Awesome. So, if all our listeners are wondering why we are discussing this and why we are discussing naturally sourced nutrients, this is because we are discussing a very important issue. Firstly, because it's food, and secondly, there are some important policy implications around this. And since we are going to be talking about proteins all the time, today we are discussing an issue called, or a topic called smart proteins, what they are, what they can do for nutrition, what they can do for the nutrition profile in the country, what are the challenges, all of those things, because it will play an important role in the way we look at food, in the way we look at nutrition, and all other things going forward. So, Shambhavi, let's get started. Yeah. How do we look at something like smart proteins? What are they? And could you just take us through this?
And why they smart?
Why are they smart? Yeah.
Okay. So smart proteins are basically proteins which are sourced using biotechnology. So I guess we call them smart because humans make them, and they're not completely sourced in nature. And therefore it is we who are smart.
And so we are actually...
Of course. But okay, jokes apart. So instead of actually sourcing our proteins through, say, meat or dairy or seafood, these are proteins that made in the lab, either through restructuring of plant proteins such as legumes or cereals, or through fermentation using microbial systems, or you actually take animal cells, grow them in a lab. So there's no slaughter involved, but we actually take just the animal cells out, you grow them in a lab, and that's cultivated meat. Right? So all of these are forms of providing protein in a palatable manner to a population. We call them also lab-based meats or plant-based meats. I have often wondered, why all of these terms have evolved. I understand that they are typically describing what is being eaten. I don't think it helps the makers of these products. But we can talk about that later on as well. But that is essentially smart protein. It's the idea that we need to be able to provide protein. And again, now we get more and more familiar with ideas of like high protein yogurt and all of that. So this is a way of delivering proteins that's supposed to be more palatable.
Sure. Yeah. And considering vegetarians have a protein deficiency, I mean, if you are a vegetarian, your sources of protein get limited, or far more limited. Therefore, this kind of protein probably will help with making up for protein deficiencies. And with increasing awareness around the need for protein, this will play a big role in getting our nutrition right or in place. Yeah. So why are they being called the next big shift in food and nutrition? I mean, what is it that makes it the next big thing?
Okay. So the first big thing in nutrition, I think, is agriculture. When we talk about lab-made proteins, right, I think a lot of people freak out, what do you mean fermentation-based? Like, are they made in the same fermentation vats that like vaccines are? Why would I want food from some place like that, right? And it freaks people out. And we often then think that, do we really want to even go this way? But if we go back centuries ago, then I think hunter-gatherers would have looked at the first revolution in food, which is agriculture, and thought that people who were farming then are idiots, right? You have such bountiful nature, you have got so many fruits and trees and herbs and everything around you that you could gather and eat. Why sit in one place and farm and, invite disease and, see your hard toils washed away because of river water, flooding or whatever, right? And so that agriculture was, I guess, our first kind of revolution in the food industry. Then in India, we obviously had the milk revolution as well.
Yeah.
The green revolution then brought in hybrid seeds, which obviously helped India become self-sufficient in grains in the last century. And what has happened slowly over time, obviously, is there's climate change that we cannot run away from as much as we want to. The amount of arable land, the amount of good groundwater for irrigation, etc., they're all slowly being depleting. World population is steadily going up, and whenever we see fertility replacement rates going down, there is chaos, right? There's people who are calling for, hey, but what happens if TFR falls below, and is this going to be the end of humanity? Which it won't be, but anyways. So at least for the foreseeable future, the world population is going to grow up, right? And a lot of the world is coming out of poverty, which means that they're no longer looking only for, hey, give us rice to eat, but give us nutrients because, we want to go to school, we want to play sports, we want to
stay
go
healthy for a
jobs.
lot of time.
Yeah. So the demand has changed from food to nutrition.
And that's an important distinction, food to nutrition.
Yeah, and that means, and all those three things combined means that there is going to be a lot of demand for nutritious food, and protein is going to be a very important subgroup of that, right? And therefore, what happens next? So we might not be able to look at traditional agriculture the way we might not be able to depend on traditional agriculture the way we do. There are technologies there that will obviously be helpful: gene editing, gene modification, the use of information for better soil health, and all of those things are happening definitely. But as much as we are scared of that idea, we also have to think about the fact that waters might not be, fish might not be available that easily. Already we know that fishermen have to take big trawlers and go into deep seas because shallow seas are no longer giving us the fish that we need. There's pollution. We know that fish are turning up with mercury, etc., which needs to be stopped. So given a lot of these issues, lab-based meats offer something that is completely new way of creating food, of creating nutrition in a way that can be standardized, it can be controlled, it can be kept pollution free, and it can be labeled in a way where we understand the complete supply chain. Right.
Yes.
So using existing things such as legumes, etc., we can actually create new pathways of making food, and hence this represents a new revolution in the way we think of nutrition.
Great. So we should reiterate the fact that they will be consistent in their nutrition profile. They will be more friendly, or they will be less resistant, or there will be less pollutants to the food that you actually grow. And there's a lot more predictability in lab grown things, right? Because it's a controlled environment and it's fairly standardized way of getting these things.
Yeah, and I think there's quality control along the way, right? I mean, if you're going to grow something in the lab, there's going to be clearly standards around how it's kept, how it is used, how it is made, so how it is labeled. So hopefully all of that will fall in place.
Yeah. So when you were talking about these various revolutions, like the food agriculture, or the green revolution, or the milk revolution, etc., the other thing that actually crossed my mind is that supplements in our food is not something new, or adding something to existing food to get a nutrition is not something new. We've seen that with iodine, right? Iodized salt, or it was the simplest, easiest, most efficient way to deliver iodine. So the idea of supplementing, or the idea of adding nutrients to an already existing food, or changing the way you make something is not that radical. We've done it, but we are just taking it to a next level, maybe in this context that we are talking about.
That we're talking about.
Yeah. So what happens? I mean, why especially, I think it's important for a place like India, because again, we are also coming out of poverty. There is a dichotomy in the sense that some parts of the country are very well fed and sometimes overfed, and there are other parts that are not. And therefore the need for looking at different kinds of food, or need for innovation is there. So are there other aspects to it that make the argument for India really focusing on this right now?
So in terms of factors of why India should be looking at this, right? I mean, there is India's self-nutritional security. There's the fact that we have a huge farmer segment that needs to be supported, and the fact that a lot of smart proteins actually rely on agriculture, which means that those jobs are not going away. We might need to skill these farmers differently. Third is a huge market, right? There are estimates of the market being in hundreds of billions of dollars by 2030. This is a global market, right? So there's a huge export opportunity for India if we set up these, if we look into investing in smart protein technologies. There's a variety of product segments, right? So there's dairy, right from eggs, there's milk, then there is the actual meat, there's seafood. So there's a lot to be done, which I think is very interesting. There's a lot of R&D that needs to be done in trying to get the texture, etc., correctly. That's I think where the real science lies. I had some lab grown food in Singapore last year. Couldn't tell the difference in what I was eating, which I thought was really cool. So, and there's already like salmon in the market. A lot of plant-based meats in even in the Indian market. The Indian market is not very open right now to cultivated meat, but at least for plant-based meats, we have quite a few players. So there's a lot of interesting happenings, and I think this is going to be very important for India. This has been recognized, right? So the government came up with a Bio E3 policy earlier this year, which focuses on developing biotechnology, and smart proteins was, and even functional foods like you spoke about, right? Where you fortify foods, right? So that's a segment under Bio E3 which is going to get some strong attention from the government.
Sure. Yeah. So you just spoke about Singapore, right? So there are all these things that are happening across the world. And we see that we have to play some kind of catch up game there. So, what are these things and where are the breakthroughs happening through? I mean, in the Indian market? Are there already players in the Indian market that actually address this demand or this need? Or, where does this go in India? I mean, what is the current state in India?
So I actually thought there's not a lot of players for smart proteins in India until I started researching it. And studying in Mumbai, I realized that there are quite a few players in Mumbai itself, which was quite surprising for me because a lot of plant-based meat products are sold within India, right? You get those nuggets, etc. I remember Genelia Deshmukh had something that took off a few years ago, the actress.
Yes.
So she had a company that was doing plant-based meats. There are quite a few. Good Dot, there is Prot. So there are quite a few who do plant-based meats. There are also a lot of companies who are making other forms of smart proteins for export. So there's a lot of that going to Singapore and New Zealand, which is very interesting that that we are actually making that. We actually have the technology already here.
Yeah.
Just that the market here does not exist here yet.
Okay. See, is it lack of awareness or is it lack of their the market access, or what is it that is stopping them from actually offering this to the Indian market?
Okay, I don't know the complete, all the exhaustive list of reasons. One of the things is that a lot of these products get covered under FSSAI,
Okay.
and they just have a novel food category. So they don't have different categories for the different forms of smart proteins, etc. So maybe regulatory pathways are not very clear. Second, I'm not sure if there have been any good surveys to figure out whether the Indian public will actually be willing to take up something like this, because we are very picky, right, about vegetarian and non-vegetarian and what defines vegetarian and non-vegetarian. And perceptions around lab-based meats obviously are going to be difficult to gauge as well, I think. Which is why I think the whole idea of calling them lab-based meats, I think, might not be very pro the product itself.
Yeah.
Because as a non-vegetarian, I'm thinking, why eat lab-based meat when I can eat meat?
Yeah, and as a vegetarian, the word meat is a little, it's okay. When you say lab grown meat, I'm okay conceptually saying that, yeah, there's no torture or there's no slaughter involved. There's nothing like that. And it's not exactly meat from an animal. But the fact that you're calling it meat and you're calling it, there are different connotations to lab grown, there are different connotations to meat, right? So for a vegetarian, the idea of meat, first of all, am I eating meat? That I think is a big mental hurdle to cross. Okay. Also, the fact that lab grown, when we say lab grown, we are.
You're imagining freaky scientists.
Yeah, we are imagining freaky scientists. And already this whole concept of natural foods, artificial something else, how organic and all those things that are coming in. So lab grown gives a connotation of something of being very artificial that is not available in the nature, and therefore we should not eat it. So when you combine the two, lab grown and meat, it kind of ticks me off. Okay, when I say it ticks me off, as a vegetarian, I probably think twice. Okay, and Having said that, I have tried lab grown. I don't know. I think it was skin or something. It tasted really bad. So I don't know how that will go. But
That's because
yeah,
you're thinking about meat.
yeah, you're always thinking that
That's
is
probably
meat. That
because
is meat.
yeah. Okay, Suman. So I hope I have convinced you that that lab grown part is actually not as abhorrent as you think. That the hunter gatherer ancestor of yours, if they ever saw you, would be appalled by what you are eating. You know what's in your fridge right now: frozen peas. If you're in these states, canned beans. Or even just agriculture as we know it in rows in farms, they would have been appalled by that. So we shouldn't really be appalled by the idea that in maybe a few decades time lab will be grown in fermenters. The meat part though, I think it's a little dicey. I think if that's called it value based protein or something like that, might have been more easy to sell than
Mm-hmm.
lab based meats. But yeah, but the
Value.
texture is there. The texture is meaty, and I guess they're being honest to the idea that they were trying to make. The sector is trying to make. But yeah, I think it might end up putting, maybe for the Indian market, it might end up putting off a few more people than if this was the US or Singapore or Australia. Having said that, there are over 300 brands who are right now trying to make some form of smart proteins in India. Zydus, the pharmaceutical company, recently bought 50% of shares in another company, and they're going to make fermentation based proteins in India, but for the export market, right? So not for the Indian market. There's a lot of buzz around smart proteins. So they're looked on as a sustainable form of meat manufacture.
Yeah, I get that in the sense that I can see the challenges for the market players. The idea of getting across the concept of first of all synthetically produced meat, and then the idea of lab grown, help consumers cross that mental barrier, right? Because even lab grown diamonds now have some other connotation. Apparently people don't look at lab grown diamonds the same way as natural diamonds or whatever other kind of diamonds. So any lab grown will have that kind of a challenge. So I think the onus will remain on market players to get this messaging across, that both are the same, or we can actually get past this barrier and actually try and consume these things. But there are other challenges too, right? Like if you're talking about regulation or access to the market itself. So what are specific challenges when it comes to policy, or when it comes to actually regulation around
Yeah,
this?
let me just talk about lab grown diamonds for a minute. I'm assuming lab grown diamonds are cheaper than natural diamonds, which is not always
Ah,
with lab grown meat
mhm.
versus natural meat at this point of time. So,
Okay. Distinction, yes, important.
we knew of this Australian company who was making lab grown duck or something like that, and selling in this really exclusive club in
Mhm.
Singapore, where it was just so expensive that we couldn't even get like a tiny thread of it. So yeah, clearly there's that distinction between the meat and the diamond market, and I think a lot of this comes down to the way it is marketed, right, and the way it is spoken about. So in terms of market access, right? So obviously, in some countries, there are very clear labeling requirements around lab-grown meat, and I think from an Indian perspective, that's going to be required in India as well. Again, as I said, there are three different types of smart proteins, right? So it can't just be lab-grown meat, but because some of them come from animal cells which are cultured in the lab, which could technically be non-vegetarian, I suppose, whereas some come from plants, so can come with the green dot. So we have to be very careful in
Mhm.
labeling and the standards and qualities that are going to be required of the facilities that manufacture it,
Mhm.
of the supply chain that feeds the agriculture,
Mhm.
etc. All of those need to be ascertained. Who are going to be the key suppliers? Right now, I think a lot of hotels buy them, a little on B2B,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
some B2C that you can get, like those nuggets, etc., that we can, burgers, etc., that we get. If so, in India, there is obviously access to plant based meats, a bit more regulatory clarity
Mhm.
on the other forms of smart protein.
Yeah, sure. When we talk in public policy or in economic reasoning, we talk about market failures. And one of the market failures we talk about is information asymmetry. So clearly, this can also become an information asymmetry problem, which will reduce the number of transactions that happen in the market. And the kind of labeling, and that's where we see the need for government intervention itself, right? So, labeling or any kind of information requirements from the producers to the potential buyers is an important bridge that needs to be made. And that is where the government can come in to specify standards and to specify actual requirements for labeling. Yeah, that can actually help with the entire thing. Are there any other regulation things that we can look at, like in terms of what can be produced, what cannot be produced? Are there some restrictions now in the market or in with
So
the
right
government
now
when we
it is very technology dependent. So as I said, because for a lot of meats, getting the texture correct is kind of the technical hurdle that
Mhm.
companies are trying to overcome. So there is salmon because the texture can be replicated, but getting that done for a lot of the other meat products is difficult. Right, so the amount of fat, the amount of protein, etc., that people enjoy in a certain meat cut, for example, and whether we can actually replicate that using either plant or animal cell culture, right? So currently, those seem to be the bottlenecks. I don't think anyone has thought about, and I don't know whether anyone has thought about if there are going to be meats that we shouldn't be selling, like human meat, like plant produced
Mhm.
and
Oh yeah.
plant based human meat. That would be a crazy idea. I am not sure. I mean, as a policy analyst, I don't really know what
Where?
it sounds abhorrent. Uh, but if it's plant,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah. So these are some maybe ethical dilemmas that will come up when we talk about
Yeah,
more
but
lab grown
I
meats.
think
The other thing I was
someone would
thinking,
also have to taste human meat, which is anyways not going to be allowed. So that I
no,
don't think there'll be. Yeah,
yeah, and I don't know if there'll be a market, so maybe we won't see it anytime soon, at least. Yeah. So the other thing that came to mind just now is if we say that we can alter the nutrient content in the lab about, say, whatever fish that we're talking of. So if we can alter them, then does that really remain fish? Can we call it
yeah. I
something
mean,
else?
in the case of salmon, it's not actually salmon meat, right? So it is
Mm.
restructured to feel like salmon meat more than anything else. There is genetically edited salmon as well. It's obviously sold as salmon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think our future generations are going to have a
Okay.
lot of yeah.
Thinking to do on this. Great. We sow the seeds for them.
There is an actual salmon, there is a genetically edited salmon, there is a lab made salmon. Which one would you prefer? Hmm.
That's interesting. It's good choice. Choice is good, and I mean they can figure out which one they want to have, and they can do. I guess the other thing would be research on this, right? That's where probably
Yeah,
the
we
government
probably
will
have those
play a
nutritional
big
values
role.
and, how much protein does
Hmm.
a normal salmon have versus other things. Yeah, it is going
Yeah.
to be very interesting. I was listening to this thing from, Chris Ashok had a tweet on about canned and
Hmm.
frozen foods and how, even though a lot of people say that this is bad,
Yeah. They're probably closer to the best nutrient profile that you can get
yeah,
than fresh, right? Because they are harvested when they are at the freshest.
yeah, and then there was also this thing about how, if it saves people efforts to actually soak the legumes, and people then eat the sprouts because they've come in a can instead of doing the effort of actually soaking them, then overall it's actually healthier for them because otherwise they wouldn't have the legumes. So if people eat the protein because it comes in a nice crispy form, maybe its nutritional value is still higher
Yeah.
than actually getting a fish
Yeah.
from the market and then cleaning it and cutting it and all, doing all of the formalities of it.
Yeah. Reducing time spent in the kitchen,
Yeah,
let's say that. And that will play a big role for
yeah,
coming generations, right? Because you don't, I mean, when you see the change in roles, we can't help but bring gender in here. But when you see the shifting roles or when you want to see roles changing, all these things will actually play a big role in that. Right. So we see that this food is going to affect a lot of dimensions of life. Nutrition, definitely. All these other third order probably effects of gender and equations in the family, etc. Are there, like, do you see something else, something more, something bigger than this? I mean, how do you look at the future of food, say 20 years from now? Do you look at them as, pills that will be popping quickly, or is there more coming?
I think there's going to be a lot of intermediate things, right? So there is a big push on climate resistant agriculture. And I think eventually, for a lot of people who believe that traditional agriculture or native farming is the way to go, it is going to be a choice of technologies that we will have to choose between, right? And native farming is going to take us only so far, after which we'll have to deliberately choose and invest in genetically edited crops, in lab-based meats. At least for those of us who love seafood, there is going to be alternatives that are going to be coming from avenues other than the sea, which might be more interesting or healthier. As I said, pollution free,
Yeah.
standardized, quality. And so I think that is where we're going to go, where we are going to have more diverse set of nutrients on our plate, which will come from avenues which are way different than what we have used to, right? The agriculture and the fishing that we are used to. It will not be the whole far-fetched dream of pills, right? So that's in sci-fi we often have this, a pill for protein and a pill for carbohydrates and all of that. Unlikely to go there in the next few decades. But yeah, more things will come in a box than out of it.
Okay, that's interesting, and I think we should be open. We should be open to what the possibilities are in the future, and this also will have a huge repercussion, or will have an effect on lifestyle generally. What are the jobs we will do? What are the I mean, because we have all this food, how will we look, or what will be different in our, what do you say, health profile itself? Like, what will be different markers? I think all of this is interesting. It is a little makes me nervous a little bit, but I think we have to keep faith in science and see where it can take us. But net net, it seems to be a positive, because it can actually help us get over, like you said, help us move from just food security to a nutrition security, right? Yeah. So if you have any last thoughts on this, you could,
Yeah,
and then we can close. And we will let our listeners think about this and hopefully, have
yeah,
some.
please feel free to ask us any questions if you want to. Someone, I wanted to leave with this thought, because I know this causes a lot of anxiety. I know people have a lot more questions on why, but we currently have plenty of food, and yes, we do. I'm not saying a doom scenario that is going to come up tomorrow, right? But there are already countries like Sri Lanka, there are African countries who banned genetically modified food, quickly went into a situation where there was no food, and then had to start buying in genetically modified food eventually, and are now open to doing research and growing them, right? So we are one famine away, we are one climatic episode away from disaster, right? So these are technologies that we have to invest in right now, not for ourselves, but for our future generations. And yes, it makes me nervous as well, right? One of the things that Suman and I both do, for example, is we send our kids to go grocery shopping, because we don't want them to think that food comes in a mall, or delivered by big
Yeah.
basket, right? That they see the vegetable vendors, that they see the kind of biodiversity that is actually present in our markets, and not just a few things that we order at home, right? So yes, we are trying to hold on to what looks like, to what a naturally farmed vegetable or a fruit looks like, right? I remember my father, when he went to the US back in the 1980s, he still tells this joke about, when I asked a kid where milk comes from, they said from food lane. It's like a mall, right? Not from a cow.
Mm.
And we are slowly and slowly stepping away from our traditional ideas of agriculture. And kids are getting used to it, right? That's being normalized for kids. So while this might say abhorrent for us, it might seem completely okay to our children in the next few decades, right? That you eat stuff that comes from a box.
Yeah.
It is up to us to make sure that what comes in the box is actually nutritious. And if this is one way of doing it, this is one way of doing it.
Sure. Thanks so much, Shambhavi. It was great talking to you. And I think this has given us a lot of food for thought for how food will look in the future. So, to all our listeners, if you have other thoughts, if you think something was not right with what we said, or if you have other opinions on this, please feel free to write to us, and we'll probably take it up another time. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks, Shambhavi, again for being with us on this show.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.